We'll set this to record. Okay, so this is the landing page that your users will have when they log into the training module inside of your database. A couple of things about the landing page is it's always going to have the calendar view on the left side. And what's important about the calendar view is if there is a training event or either an assignment for training or a staff activity that is scheduled for that individual that's logged in, it will show up on their calendar on that day on the left side. So if there's some event that you decide to schedule for your personnel that they have to complete or they have to attend, and the day today is the day they'll have to attend that, it will always be on the left side of the view. The right side of the view is the bulletin board. So the bulletin board is used here. It's also used over in the dashboard part of our software. And this is where you can provide information to those personnel. And could it be, I know the assistant to the fire chief introduced herself earlier. If there's any kind of memos or messages or any kind of training information, just another way for administration to communicate with the personnel on the floor is using the bulletin board. So we always display the bulletin board in the training module, and we can also have it as a widget in the dashboard. So that's going to be the landing page for the users of the system. Once they get to that point to where they're the user of the system, they have a couple of options. If they're going to manually enter training, they can go to the calendar and they'll be able to add events, training assignments, and staff activities from the calendar view, or they'll be able to go to the user center. And if they have the rights to add an assignment, they'll be able to add an assignment directly from the user center. So that's what the user's interface is going to look like. They'll see the library, and the library will have any documentations that you upload for training library for them to watch or use or review. They will not see the admin center unless they are an admin trainer. So the level of admin trainer is those persons that are responsible for participating in training, conducting training, but also maybe managing what's happening in training as far as, are my shift personnel getting their correct hours? Do I have to go in and validate anybody's training that's been completed? That's what happens in the admin center location. And then the super users are going to have the management console. And the management console is where you actually set up your system and use your system in that process. So that's kind of a layout in going into the system. Let me tell them they told me to try it. I'm gonna tell them that you've already set me up directly, so they'll know I'm in the system. So in our system, we have a couple of things we look at. The first thing is we will allow you to schedule training to an individual, which means that you can go into our system, you can select a template, a training template, and you can assign it to personnel to complete it during a week, a month, a quarter of a month, a quarter of a year, whatever timeline you want to open up the training class for. The other way you can conduct training is you can have a list of topics and you can allow personnel to log into the system and self-register for a training assignment and complete the training assignment without it being assigned to them. And then the third way you can document training is that the personnel on the floor or the training officers, when members come out and participate in training, once the training is completed, they can go in and document that we had this training from this time. This was a topic. These were the members that participated, and document it that way. So we have a couple of different ways, or a few different ways, that training can be entered into our system. The biggest thing is the management part is where we set up everything. So I'm going to start in management, and I'm going to look at the management cycle and go through the settings of it. And the first thing you'll notice is we have system settings. So evidently we brought data in from another database. And what we have is first is called categories. And in your library, in your training system, there's about 92 different categories you have built in to your system. I have some departments that have as few as 5 categories. Think of categories of being ways to place your training topics into certain groups, so that when a member of the department needs to go find a training topic, he can use that category to filter out and only have certain topics show up for them to look at. So I don't know where your database came from, but all of these are basically categories that came over from that database. And these are available to you for you to use or not use. In your setup, you'll want to go through here and figure out what categories are still going to be valid and which categories you really no longer consider to be a category in our system. And I guess I'm going to jump around a little, but not much. But just to show you, for example, if I come down here to templates, thinking of templates as being the actual class topics. And then here is where your categories reside. So you'll notice right here, a user will be able to click on a category. And when he clicks on that category, the templates that are assigned to that category will be what he has to pick from for the training topic. So that's kind of how we use categories inside of Fireworks in that process. So that's the first thing that, and anytime a department brings in data from another RMS, we always have that period of massaging and figuring out, how does this system use categories versus how my last system used categories. So I don't know if it came from Firehouse or if it came from ESO or where it came from, but in Fireworks, a category for us is a way for you to filter out and group your topics into certain areas like you have here. All of these topics are built in as NFPA topics, and that's the category you have. And these are the actual assignment topics in that process. So
our our information came in from Vector.
Okay, came in from Vector. Okay, good. So this is kind of how you can look at it. So moving forward in our system, I always recommend that we start by looking at the categories. And if there are items in here that you don't think need to be used as a category, you have the capabilities when you're setting up your system by clicking on the X and removing that from the category section. The only thing I recommend is that you go through and set up all of your assignments first before you remove the categories, so that you make sure you have the appropriate grouping, not name, available. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't need the AAR. And then halfway through their training list, they realize, oh, I need that AAR back, because that would be a good way to put these all in one bag. And I use the analogy of a bag of M&Ms. We're going to empty out the bag of M&Ms, and categories are going to put the green ones together, the red ones together, and so forth. If that analogy isn't too far off the case, that's just the way that I tell people that I see categories, as being a way to put everything in little groups together. So you're able to manage all of the categories in your system. The second item in system settings are the instructors. And you'll notice that these are instructors that came in, and anywhere to where you'll notice that you have an instructor to where there is no email address assigned to them, those are instructors that are not inside of your database. So these may have been guest instructors that came in from your other system. They're not built into your database. So we didn't have an email address for them. We may not have had their last name. So we've kind of duplicated that process in as far as that goes. So this is where it comes into play, and notice you have a total of 302. If there's an instructor that you don't want to have in your system any longer, you have the same way of Xing it out here. And it's important to note that anywhere that you delete something by using the red X in the training area, if there is an historical training event that is using that information, we do not delete it, we archive it. So we move it over to a non-active status so that for historical purposes, when you print out that information, it will give you that information so it's available to you. It may move over, and you'll notice all of our boxes have the archive toggle to where as you may hide stuff, if it is being used, we'll drop it in as an archive and it'll show up in our archive side of our system instead of the live side of our system. And that's kind of how we document that throughout our whole system.
Yeah, I think it must have somehow pulled it from the roster.
Yes, I think it did. Yes.
Yeah, because we have extra things in there. We have ones called fillers. So in case we get mutual aid, we can just drop those people on an apparatus. So
Right.
I've already gone ahead and I'm looking and I see where we have a lot of extra ones in there that I'll go ahead and clear out so the training people don't have to.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and the biggest thing is, and there's a big discussion. Well, do I just start fresh, or do I import my data? My personal opinion is if I've got historical data, I don't want to go to 3 different programs to find out a training history. If I can bring it all in and massage it and fix it, then that's my preference in that process. So the third section is locations. And this is where you can document if the department wants to document where training takes place. If you want to know that training took place at a fire station versus a training facility versus a state academy versus a national fire academy, you can build in a list of locations that will allow you to document where the training took place. And then the users, instead of having to free text in a location, because we do give them the flexibility to where they can free text in a location, they also have the flexibility here to where you can provide them with a list to they can click on where the location of the training was at. So this is a list that you build in into our system. The equipment list is also another list we have available. And what the equipment list does, it allows you to document your prop usage. So for example, for ISO, the 3 props that they look for your prop usage is your training grounds, your smoke burn room, and your drill tower. So commonly, a lot of departments will populate those 3 as a start. That way, if they're going to their drill facility for training, they can document what props were used. So if in their ISO evaluation, if there is a question about proof of prop usage, you have a report that'll provide that information. Other departments, in my department, we have about 20 props listed. We'll go in and we'll document, where SCBA's used, where ground ladders used, where aerial ladders used. We get very in the weeds, are very specific about the prop usage. And that's because of if you have a near miss and you have NIOSH come in and look at the issue, the big thing is if you don't document props or training equipment was used during a training session, then they have a question about it. And ours was basically asked about we had a Mayday and the guy that got injured, and when the NIOSH came in and looked at it, they asked about to see a history of SCBA training. We had all the training classes documented, but we didn't specifically, either the company officer or the training officer didn't specifically state that SCBAs were actually donned or doffed during the training event. So we had a learning experience. So our equipment section is where you can document what equipment you would like your personnel to document that was used during that training event. And that becomes a part of that permanent record inside of there. And then the next one under system settings is we allow you to create, for lack of better term, user fields inside of our training and activity section. If there's a certain question that's not documented in training, but you want the personnel to fill it out, you can create that question and add that question and then assign it to your training templates. In our area, our water is provided privately. So a part of our agreement is that we provide monthly reports on estimated water used in fire training. So we have a field in our database that basically asks, estimated amount of water flowed for the training exercise, and the guys type in whatever they think, however many gallons of water they flowed during that training exercise. So this is a section to where we allow you to where if it's not built into our template, you can actually add that specific question to our training template for your personnel to fill out. And then, of course, with most common software now, we also allow you to create tags. If you want to have certain tags to build into your training system and to your activity system, you can create them at that level inside of that process. So the first part here is looking at the 20,000 foot level of some different fields that we provide you to use as you go through and build out your training components inside of our system. And that's something that as a department, whoever manages training comes up with the process of how we're going to document that information. The next section is a user section. And this basically just provides the training division with a look of all of the people that are inside the department. And then it does provide you with the one feature to where in training, if someone is changing their permission, you have the rights from the training section to actually change their permission in the system without having to go over to the user section. So this is the one thing that training administrators have access to.
That's nice.
The other thing I always point out right here, and this is, I haven't talked to a training division yet that didn't like this feature, is we have what's called here the group section. So in the group section, you're able to come in here and you can build in groups related to personnel. So if you have paramedics, you can build a group in that has your paramedics so that when you're conducting a training class for your paramedics, instead of having to go through the whole list of your personnel, you can just select the group and it gives you a short list. Same with your drivers, your officers, your hazmat techs, and some departments also bring in their shifts, but we allow you to break shifts based on the user settings. So groups is a pretty neat component that allows you to take smaller pieces or make smaller pieces of your department. So it's just a little bit easier to document training assignments and activities. So this is where you can manage and see the users. Now the validator section is, and I guess the question that I will ask is, as a department, do you require for someone the QC review your training that's entered in? I know that primarily on the ALS or the paramedic side, if you're working on your national registry or your Florida certifications, you may want to have a paramedic supervisor or a paramedic training officer validate those classes that are needed for their recertification. But what validation is a person on the floor can actually document that they attended the training session, but then they will not get credit for those hours until the validator actually goes in and reviews the information, reviews what was documented about the training and the personnel that attended, and they will actually do, for lack of better terms, a QA QC on the training entry process. So I don't know if some departments do validation, some departments don't. It's just a component that we have on hand so that you can set up your validators so that when a training is completed, they can routinely go into the system and give the final QA QC for training classes. So that's a component we have in our system. And this is where you actually set up those people that'll serve as validators in the process. And that's kind of how we do that situation there. And then, like I said here, group settings we talked about earlier. This is where you can add a group, you can give it a name, and then you can add the people that belong to that group. And it's just a way to give you a little bit better pile to document for training and assignments and so forth. I'm going to skip over certifications. It comes back to it. The next part we have is what's called report alerts. And I think this is more of a value to your training officers and the people that manage your training, possibly your division chiefs and things like that. This is where you can custom build in reports in our system to where if training has been assigned to individuals and people did not complete the training, you could get reports emailed to you that would give you that information on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly schedule so that you would have an idea of training that was assigned that was not completed. There's multiple reports that go into play. You'll notice you can get one for certifications that are expiring in 30 days or less, assignments that are completed in the past 30 days, completed in the past week, and then those that have not been completed. So if you're in the habit of not wanting to log into the system, but you'd like to know what's going on in training, you can actually go in and build in some report criteria that would provide you with that information, and you can designate what people will get the reports in that process. So that's kind of what our report alert section does inside of there as far as documenting that. And then you have templates, and templates are basically, for lack of better terms, the topics. So you'll notice you have no activities built in currently inside of your system. You do have assignments that are built in, and these are basically training functionalities, and you have over 2,000 training assignments built into your system. And then you have a section called courses. So courses are basically an accumulation of activities and assignments. So you could assign, for example, a course on, um, a firefighter course for recruits. And what that does is inside of that course will be multiple assignments and our activities. And then as the personnel complete those assignments, it will show you how far along they've progressed in their course. A lot of departments will build in a course for their rookie schools, just so that as their training division is going through the process of conducting that recruit academy, the administrators have an idea of what percentage they're at as they're flowing through that process. And it allows them to see where all the personnel are in there. Other places do it for their high angle rescue teams and things like that if they have certain courses. But we give you those two levels. We give you those assignments, which are the individual topics. And then we also provide you with courses, which is that grouping of assignments and or activities to complete something. And the other one that pops out in my head is always the new driver program. So if I've got new drivers I'm promoting, and my program may have so many hours of assignments and then maybe a couple hours of activities to complete that departmental course for a new driver, this is where you can build all of that information in, and it works to your benefit, allowing you to basically track that information. And then the last one basically down here is your question banks. We allow you in EPR systems to actually create your own departmental questions. So what that allows you to do is go into our system and create questions that you may have, and then you can take those questions and you can actually assign them to templates so that when the members complete a training topic, they will be able to possibly have to go in and take a test and successfully pass the test to get credit for the training class. So that's just a feature that we add in, is basically called question banks, to where you can add those questions into our system. So just an overview of basically our general system settings inside of the management component. And this is pretty much where, if you're a super user, this is where you'll live. So commonly your training chiefs, possibly your training instructors, but anyone responsible for managing the training division spends a lot of their time in this section right here. Any questions so far about dealing with this from a training perspective?
You guys good?
Okay, so let's now dig a little bit further into the weeds. Certifications. Certifications inside of Fireworks can operate in one or two different ways. One way is you can track degrees like you have here. So for example, you may have a certification called an associate degree, and commonly inside of this system is you're able to track a degree, and you want to document the degree that person has. My personal preference with this is that in Fireworks, under the users and permissions section, under the staff section, we now have a historical section to where you can track the degree, and you can also attach a copy of the degree to that person's staff record in their document section. And we do a better job of tracking degrees in the staff record versus in the training record. That's just my personal opinion from managing systems for so many years. If you want to track it into here, into this process, you can do that. Basically what would happen is you would have these as degrees that are built in, and then over under the admin center is where you would add the names of the person that obtained that degree, and I'll show you that shortly. So one of the things you can do is document your degrees here. So the other thing you can do in this process is you can document, like right here, you have your ACLS instructor. That is going to basically renew. And if I was looking at the ACLS instructor, I would want to come and add in here a subject, which would be basically, I would just say ACLS instructor, or just put instructor. This is instructor. And then the second box right here is where we'll document how many hours that has for the instruction component. And when we talk about hours, we're talking about assignment hours or activity hours. So if I knew what an ACLS instructor's class was, and I knew it was a 40-hour class or whatever it might be, I could put the number of hours in there. And then over here at the pencil, if I have inside of my list of templates an ACLS instructor's class, let's see, instructor update. I could come in here and I could click that class so that when that topic is entered into the training section, those hours would account towards the certification. And then I would add my instructors into this certification, and I can track their progress for their ACLS instructor certification. So what we use certifications for is we build in the criteria that's needed. We link the template, either the assignment template or the activity template that's needed to match that criteria into the certification. And then as the personnel enter that training, if their name is required in that certification or attached to that certification, we will give you certification progress updates that tells you how that person is progressing through there. Also, we allow you to do inside the certification is document if this is an ISO certification or not. And then we ask you if you want this certification to automatically renew, you can change it to automatically renew on expiration date. And then we want you to tell us what is the cycle before it renews. Is it a 12-month certification? Is it a 24-month certification? Is it a 36-month certification? If the certification is a one-time certification and does not renew, then basically also give you those criteria to where it does not automatically renew, which means that once a person's certification period has exhausted, then they're no longer a part of that certification. But you can go back to that period of time historically where they had the certification, and we will keep their record showing that they had a certification during that time period. So this is kind of how we use this process inside of Fireworks to track certifications, either departmental or those that are needed for either state, federal, or insurance industry criteria. So this is one of the things that we have in our system to build in certifications, and we allow you to create those certifications that are needed by your department. We just give you the component to where you can track that information as well inside of there. One of the other things we do in the certification arena is if this class is part of the certification, but you can only use this class one time during the certification period, we allow you to come in here and limit how many times that topic can be used in the certification. So let's say for ACLS instructor, they had to have so many hours of ACLS courses to where they actually participated in courses, but they only had to have one instructor update. So I would basically put a 1 right here next to the instructor update, and then I would add their other courses in here so that during the time of their certification, they would only get credit for one of the instructor updates, even though they may have attended 2 or 3 of them. They'll still get credit for the training. It just wouldn't count towards the certification. So we give you another level of limitations here at the certification level to document that process of how often they can use a topic in their certification. So this is kind of how we break out certifications. And I'm going to go down a little bit because we commonly build them in, and I don't know if they built them in here. I want to see. There they are. So here's your ISO certifications. So I know one of the personnel on the call is your compliance person for ISO. So just to kind of show you how we built this out is we've give you a starter set here. So for example, I'm going to click on ISO firefighter. So ISO firefighter are those personnel in the department that basically have the process to where they're going to have to document training, and it's going to be documented on a calendar year. And then this process will start over so that when you do get your packet from the training academy or from ISO, they're going to ask you for information. So as a firefighter, we've kind of given you a cookie cutter list for you to start with. So you'll notice we call it the ISO firefighter, and it's going to automatically renew on expiration date. The cycle is 12 months. It is ISO. And then we've built in your ISO criteria. So as a firefighter, you're responsible for 192 hours of company training each year. You're not responsible for driver training, but if someone that's a firefighter attends driver training, we're going to overflow that into company training. This is a departmental preference. If you say, no, I cannot count driver training as company training, then you can basically just remove this right here and or exit out, and you can remove this from that certification. But what we have in our system is we provide you with the capability of doing what's called an overflow. You can overflow from the subject to a second subject, and it can only be done one time. So saying that, the one below it is called facility training. So these are basically drills at your drill facility using props. And in the current ISO, in the fire suppression rating schedule, the current edition, you have to have 18 hours per person of documented prop use. And that's going to be commonly fire suppression training that happens at a training facility, and you either use the training grounds, the smoke burn room, or the drill tower. So what we've done here is we're saying, okay, the first 18 hours of facility training is going to count towards facility training. Anything over those 18 hours, we're going to count for company training because it is fire suppression related. So we're going to use an overflow there. The next topic we have built in is hazmat. Current FSRS is 6 hours of hazmat. And we're going to give you the option to overflow anything above the 6 to company training as well. And you may say, well, you know what? I don't think I'm going to do that because hazmat needs to be hazmat. But if you read the FSRS guidance, it says that the hazmat training is hazmat related to those hazmat materials that are found in residential structure fires. So it could possibly count, but that's again a department preference. In Louisiana, we can't count any medical training towards our ISO. So I would basically remove this one out if I was in Louisiana. I'm not sure how they do it in the state of Florida, If they allow you to count medical training towards your ISO hours, that'll be a decision for your compliance officer. So if I wanted to remove this out, I would just basically click the X and remove it out of that certification. And then same with officer training. In the FSRS, officer training is pretty straightforward. It is that personnel supervision, leadership, that arena. And it doesn't kind of meet the definition of company training, but we let you have that option. The biggest thing you'll notice here is that in all of these hours, the ones that are not required for a firefighter, we're giving 0, so that if they attend that training class, it's going to automatically go over. The other thing we'll show you is that the max overflow column is where you can say, well, I'm going to let you count officer training, but I may only let you count 3 hours of officer training. So the max overflow column is where you can document that threshold of where the hours are going to stop as far as moving them to company training. So we give you a couple of different areas in setting up a certification. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and hopefully the compliance officer may have a question or two, or I want to make sure he understands how we view the overflow in the certification process. No question? Okay. So the next one we have that we deal with is, you'll notice we next have our driver. Same process here, but you'll notice that we're requiring 12 hours of driver training for that person. And then we have the officer. And we look at the officer, same process here for the officer. Let me go to the officer. And officers, unless they're also considered drivers, this should actually have a 0 in it in all practical terms. They're having the same thing, and you'll notice down here, they're required the officer training. So in some departments, if the personnel are considered firefighter operators, you can build a certification called firefighter operators and require both the company training and the driver training. In some smaller departments, I have those personnel that are firefighter operator officer, to where they require everything because they have all 3 levels. They may be an officer, but they also have to drive trucks, and they also fight fire. So you can customize your certifications to meet your needs inside of that process. So this is kind of how you can go through and design that certification to meet your needs. All certifications can basically have a certification alert added to them, so that you can add an alert that says, hey, so many days before this certification is set to renew, send everybody an email saying, hey, the certification is set to renew in X number of days. So you can do that process to provide that person with a little bit of information about when their certification is going to renew. So this is the first step of working the system, is building in certifications. Once you have your certifications built in, the next step is basically adding the personnel to the certifications. So that's done under our admin center. And under the admin center, you'll notice that you'll show a history of activities, a history of training assignments that have been built into the system, a history of courses, and then the section of certifications. And when it comes to certifications, you'll notice that all the certifications are listed, and you can go through the certification process. Let me find the ISO ones.
While you're doing that, I saw it seemed like there were blanks in the certifications, like with the ISO and all that. They were like duplicates. I guess, like you said, we just build out the ones before we
Correct. You
remove
build out the
anything.
ones you want to use. Correct. Before you move. Yes.
Okay.
So for example, we'll come into the ISO ones. There we go. All right. So if I was going to come into the ISO certifications, you'll notice that these are built out with required hours. So if I went to the firefighter one, I would click on the firefighter ISO certification. And you'll notice when I click on them right here, it has a list of personnel that are firefighters. So you've already got these people, but I don't know why they're duplicated. They shouldn't be duplicated in the system because these are your personnel that are firefighters. So every one of these personnel should be built into your system as an ISO firefighter. And then in their date, it should be listed for the first day of the year of the period to the last day of the period. And then it will automatically renew for the next year in that process. For some reason, you guys have got duplicates built in. I'm not really sure how the duplicates got there unless that was an import issue that when data came in, but that's something we can remove the duplicates out of the system.
Mine just, no, okay, now I see them back again. I thought mine refreshed and they only went to
No,
singles.
this came in with an import. I'm pretty sure it came in with an import, or somebody added people twice, which you can add people twice. And
Yeah,
if
but
all
we
you
have,
want to do was take them out, is you could just basically exit them out and they would be removed from the system.
is it being
Yeah.
is some of this stuff being pulled from the staff admin section?
No, none of this is being pulled from the staff admin section. All of the certifications are managed in the training section itself.
But I mean the people themselves. So let me quick go into admin. I'll tell you what module. I think it's the staff and
Now it's not being pulled from the ISO section.
no, I'm looking at the users and permissions. Would those names be pulled from the users and permissions and from Vector at the same time?
Possibly so, but someone had to add these people into the certification. So someone
Okay.
had to come into here and click add and grab a list of people, put the dates
Oh,
in and add them.
yeah.
So
We
that's where
haven't
I'm
done.
thinking somebody, either the system did that when it imported from Vector, or somebody went and was experimenting and did that, but we can fix all of that. That's not a
Yeah, no,
problem.
but this is the first time we've all been in the training section, to
Okay,
be honest.
so we'll have to go in there and I'll work with them on getting that cleaned up.
Okay.
So each person should be listed inside of here for the time period, and it should be for the time period they're there. But what I was going to tell you is, let's say, for example, Kobe Brown got a promotion. I could come into Kobe Brown and say, okay, on today, he got a promotion to, let's say, driver. So I could click on today and end his session as a firefighter. And then I could go over to the driver connection and I can start him today as a driver through the end of the year. And for the year, it would show that he had 10 months as a firefighter. These are the hours he earned as a firefighter. And then he had 2 months as a driver. And these are the hours he earned as a driver. So we allow you to actually show that promotion in his ISO progress report, as well as showing it in your records under the management for staff, to where you'll show that historical promotion that took place. So we allow you to capture the hours based on the ISO criteria, and we capture those in 2 different areas in that process. So we do track, and the biggest thing is I often tell people there is a way to track that promotion from inside of the ISO component through our certification area. So that was one of the things that some departments has asked, what happens when a person gets promoted? And this is what we do to go in and handle that. Same way if a person retires, resigned, or is terminated. You can go in here and document that process to say that this is a time that the person was actually with the department. So for your ISO purposes, you may have a person that retired halfway through the year, and we're going to show that in his certification track as well. Third part is if you have a person that's on extended leave, they work the first 2 months of the year, then they're out on extended leave, sick leave for 9 months, and then come back. You can add them into that certification twice, have them in the first side for the first 2 months, re-add them to the certification for the remainder of the months, and now it would show that there was a gap in their certification process and there was a gap in their time on the department. So just different things we can do inside of the certifications that allows you to capture that information and document that. So you build in your certifications under the management section. You assign your team members to the appropriate certifications they belong to. And then the last thing we do in that whole process is we work with our templates. And this is where we go in and we make sure that our training assignments are correct as far as the terminology we want to use, and that they're linked to the appropriate certification. So for example, I'm in the assignments area, and there's a couple of things we'll talk about. All of your assignments are either going to show up here in the live side of the system, or if you hide them because you no longer want to use them, but you have historical documentation, they will be over in the archives side of the system. So this is kind of how we document that inside of the software. So the next step we look at is, you'll notice that all of these have a length of 0, which means they're going to give you the hours based on time spent in conducting that training class. So from the time that the captain said they started the class until the time that the captain said they ended the class, we're going to give you full credit for those hours when you enter that training topic. Right here is where, if we've said earlier about our test bank, and if you decide you wanted to create a test bank for this particular topic, this is where you can actually go into our test system to create a test bank. If for some reason you decided that this doesn't need to be a training assignment, it actually needs to be an activity, this is where we can switch content from assignment to activity. And on the activity side, if you have content that actually needs to be an assignment, you'll have the same switchback feature so that you can switch it back over to an assignment side. And then the third one is where we actually are able to go in and edit the content. So when we say we're editing the content, we're basically allowing you to open up and say, okay, the name of this course is firefighter orientation. We're going to give it a category of basically company training. Then below here where it says related certifications, this is where we're going to attach it to that certification. So if I come in here and just type in ISO, I'll say, okay, this needs to count for company training for a driver, company training for a firefighter, and company training for an officer. So we've just taken this class topic and we've placed it into its ISO certification criteria. And that's where it will exist, so that when this class is conducted, if the personnel that are attending and have completed the class are in any one of those 3 certifications, those hours will count towards their subjects in that certification. So they don't have to check a box to say this is company training or driver training or whatever. Whoever is managing your training division designates where those topics are going to go inside of the system. So in that process, this is kind of where we change it up a little bit, and we allow you to document that inside of here. So at that point, I would click on the check, and I now have assigned those certifications. If you require validation, this is where you can click to require supervisor validation for the training. If you want to come in here and document that this should only be a 2-hour class, this is where you can come in here and say this should only be a 2-hour class. Or you can say we're going to document it by time spent, to say we'll allow from 0 to no more than 4 hours for this session to be completed. So we allow you with 2 different components. And here's always the things that I have to advise training management of, is that if you use the auto assign component, those company officers that are documenting the training, if they put that they spent 1 hour doing this, thinking that they're going to get 2 hours of credit, that's not the way we document. Basically, auto assign is kind of telling them that they can get up to 2 hours of credit. If the time they started until the time they completed is 1 hour, we're only going to give them 1 hour credit for that training. If the time they started till the time they completed was 3 hours, because they may have called a run in between or in the middle of the training, the most credit we're going to award them is 2 hours. So as a training manager, when you're building in your templates, you can come in here and designate the process of how you want these hours and how you want the credit to be assigned inside of that process. In the learning objective or notes section, this is where you can provide a brief description of what the training was about. And once you build in that description or those objectives into this section, every time this template is used by your personnel, those objectives will automatically default into that training section for that class. If this was a class to where props were used, they would have the capabilities of going in here and listing all the props that were used when they document the training. Or if it is a training template that you build in and you designate that props have to be used on this training, you can go ahead and preload what props have to be used on this training event. For public education activities, we give you a whole bunch of stuff that we'll talk about in a minute. If you have a video in the training library that you've uploaded from YouTube, or one you made yourself, or one you downloaded from wherever, this is where you can assign that video from your library to the training class, so that when the personnel take the class, they can actually click on the video and watch the video as a part of the training. We will not let them complete the training unless the video has been opened. I wish I could say has been watched, but our process is the video has to be opened in order for them to complete the training. Below that is where we have a place for you to add those dynamic fields. those custom fields to training that you may want to ask something extra. And then on the right side over here, we have check boxes that allow you to do a couple of things. So the first one is to set elevated permissions. So what elevated permissions means is when you build somebody into our training package as a learner or a trainer or an admin trainer or a user, there is a checkbox inside of those permissions to where you can have this person as maybe a super learner, is what we call them, and those personnel have what are known as elevated permissions. And what elevated permissions means is there may be a training topic, and I'll use paramedics for example. There may be ALS paramedic topics that are built into your training library, and you only want your paramedics to be able to see those topics. When I'm setting up those topics in our system, I would click the elevated permissions box. And then what else I would do is I would go to those super learners and I would make sure that my paramedics are super learners. So they will be able to see the templates to where someone that is not a paramedic would not be able to see the templates. I hope that explanation makes sense, but that is what we're talking about with elevated permissions. Self-registration for learners. Learners cannot create a training session on their own without having the self-registration box checked for the template. If the self-registration box is not checked and they are a learner, they would have to be assigned the class in order to complete the class. Now your trainers and your admin trainers and your super users are not affected by the self-registration feature. It's just for those learners that don't have the rights to create an assignment in the system. Below that is to set reminders. One of the things I mentioned early on is that we're able to schedule training. And a part of that scheduling training is that we can come in and set up the templates to automatically set reminders. And we use two basic features. First is we'll let them know however many days you set before the class is over. If they have not completed the session, we're going to send them an email and tell them that, hey, you've been assigned firefighter orientation. It expires in 5 days and you still have not completed the training class. You can also set your reminders to notify them 1 or 2 days before the class period opens up to inform them that, hey, you have been assigned firefighter orientation starting in 2 days. So that's kind of how we document this. And in most cases, it provides 3 emails. The first one is, as soon as you assign the personnel to the class and you hit save, it's going to send everybody you put in that class an email telling them that a class has been assigned to them. However many days you set before the class period opens up, they'll get their first reminder. And then however many days you set before the class period closes, only if they have not completed the session, they'll get their third and final email or their second reminder. So that's kind of how we work with you to try to make sure that you get as close to 100% completion on all of your training assignments. And that's the set reminders feature. Alert staff completion basically says, once this course is finished, who do you want to know and get an email to say this course has been completed? So you can also set that in to that process so that when they take this class that is finished, or they document that they completed this class, that you can have someone on the department get an email notifying them that the class is completed. And then below that, you have the limit registration feature. And this is basically where if they're only a certain group or they're only a certain rank, those are the only people that can take the class. So you can allow for self-registration, and then you can limit who can actually register for the class, either based upon their rank or based upon their specific group that they're assigned to. And then down here is towards the bottom. This is where you can build in your SCORM information. So you'll notice, I think you guys are tied into Jones and Bartlett, which you are. And here are all the Jones and Bartlett topics. So when you select one of these topics, and let's just see if we have orientation in here. Here we go. If I wanted to say that fire service orientation is actually going to be this Jones and Bartlett class, when I check that, I have just linked Jones and Bartlett SCORM to this class. So now, in theory, I could assign this class to everybody in the department. When they get the email saying they have this class scheduled to take for the month of January, they can take it anytime during January. But when this is in their calendar and it pops up and says play, they're going to have to follow the Jones and Bartlett criteria and walk through the interactive training. They're going to have to take the test and pass the test before they can be awarded credit for this training environment. So this is where we tie in Jones and Bartlett into our system so that you can actually go through that process to have individual topics that are interactive training assigned to individuals in the department above and beyond their company training, if that's the way the department wants to function. And then below that, if you have prerequisite materials, you can come in there and order in the requisite and say they got to do this, 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 and this before they can take the class. So that's where we allow for that. And then the last section down here is if you have PowerPoints or you have photos or you have an SOG or something that you want them to review as a part of this training class, you will open that up here as the resource. And in the event of that process, it's kind of like we did with the video section. In the event of that process over here in the resource area, they have to at least open the resource before they can document that they completed the training class. They don't have to read it all, but they have to at least open it.
Okay, can you go back and show me how you got to the learning materials and it says SCORM content? Because I don't see that on mine.
So right here, when you're in the I'm in the management section under templates, and I opened up an assignment template, and right here under the SCORM content is when I clicked on the SCORM content line, it brought up the link for me to select my SCORM content. And there are all the topics that are in the SCORM topic that y'all have subscribed to. You have 155 topics.
Okay, I see it now. I'm sorry. I think I was under add an assignment. So
okay, yes. So because you can't add SCORM from the user section to where you're actually documenting assignment, you'll add SCORM to the template under the management section so that when the user actually picks that topic, if you've already assigned a SCORM content to them, they will have to complete that training.
Okay.
And then one of the things is inside of here, you can actually get a preview of seeing what the training is inside of the system. So it will bring you through the whole process. So if you're building it and you want to make sure you can add it, you can preview the whole module to make sure that that's the one you want to have inside of the system. So it does allow for that preview for the instructor inside of there as well. So that's kind of where we're at in the templates section. So we're going to take a short break here in a minute, but were there any questions about setting it up a template before we go any further, or do y'all want to take a break and come back and look at questions? I know this is your first time to see the material, and I know I'm going through a lot of stuff because there's a lot of things to build out. But any questions so far?
None for me.
Okay. Can we take about a 5-minute break?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.